Hello everyone, we're now at Lesson 4, Historical Background of South Korea. Now, up till this week, we have looked at the big picture of globalization and globalism to understand how the world has changed around us. And then we moved on to transnational corporations. What are transnational corporations? What are its basic characteristics? What are its problems, challenges, and so on? And then we move down to the region, Asia Pacific. What has happened in this region as a whole before we moved on to the South Korean case. Now this week we're going to look at the historical background of South Korea. In order to understand how the South Korean conglomerates came about, we want to understand South Korea's developmental history. So the readings this week cover those topics. Now the first reading is from Steer, Shin, and Ung-sun. It's from the book called the ch4, Korea's New Industrial Might. And then you're going to read a chapter from my book called Big Business, Strong State, Collusion and Conflict in South Korean Development, 1960 to 1990. In this chapter, I'll give you the overview of South Korean development to understand how the business group came about and why it came about in that particular way. And then we're also reading Kim Jong-un's report, The Rise of Korean Companies. The topics that we're going to cover are 4 topics. The first one is the historical background, the geography, culture, and its people. Now, some of the people who are taking this course, you may know a lot about Korea, so this may seem redundant. But I know that there are some of you who really don't know where Korea is, what its people are like, what its culture is. So I want to do a brief introduction of Korea's historical background. And then, before we move on to the rapid industrialization of South Korea, which occurred from around the early 1960s, we want to understand what Korea was like in the 1940s and 1950s. Now, during the Korean War, the Korean peninsula was devastated. About 80% of the Korean peninsula was affected by war. That meant there were fires, there were a lot of ammunition, explosions, and so on. So the whole country was very devastated during this period. And after the Korean War, when they measured the Korea's GNP per capita, it stood at less than $100. In 1961, before Korea began its massive push for rapid industrialization, GNP per capita stood at only $81. Now, $81 in 1961 may be a little bit more than what it is worth today, but it was truly one of the poorest countries in the world. Now, South Korea, with $81 GNP per capita, has now become a major industrial powerhouse. It is ranked in the 12th or the 13th largest economy in the world, with GNP per capita about $20,000. How did this come about? So before we go on to the topic of South Korean conglomerates, we want to look at Korea's developmental history. So we're going to look at rapid economic development since about the 1960s. Now, for about 2 decades, Korea grew per annum about 10%. This is a remarkably rapid economic development. The whole economy was transformed in very dramatic ways from an agrarian economy to a major industrial powerhouse. We're now moving into a service-oriented economy. So we want to understand how the Korean economy grew since the 1960s, and this is the key to understanding how South Korean business conglomerates grew out of this context as well. And then we're going to cover Korea and the world economy. How is the Korean economy evaluated in this current period? What are its challenges? What are its prospects for the future? And this will be this week's lesson 4. Thank you, and I will see you during our next lesson.